Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Analysing Anfield, your tactics and analytics podcast, courtesy of the Blood Red channel. I'm Josh Williams, and I'm joined by David Hughes. Dave, how's things, mate?
Yeah, very good. Thank you, mate. Good to be back.
I feel like we're quite late to the party this week. We're obviously recording on the Thursday, and we have Manchester United to talk about. Something happened at Old Trafford, Dave. That's one way of putting
One way of
it.
putting it, yeah.
Yeah, but we still haven't spoke about it. As I said, late to the party, probably the last to get around to it. It's just the way the scheduling works sometimes. But yeah, we have to get into that, of course. And we have to look ahead to Brighton this weekend. Liverpool play at 3 o'clock on Saturday. But yeah, first things first, mate. Manchester United. I mean, what on earth happened?
Madness ensued. Honestly, I don't know. Well, I know, obviously. It was just, for all United's issues, I could have easily foreseen a Liverpool win. But just not in that manner, And although it was a 5-0 victory, which in itself is a very big deal. Of course, it is. It's a kind of generational victory. It was the way it played out, and I think I saw Michael Cox make a really good point in a tweet earlier in the week, or maybe on the game day, where he'd said this is the most embarrassing result for Manchester United in the Premier League era. And he said, obviously, the Manchester City game where they lost 6-1 is considered, previously before the Liverpool game on Sunday was considered that result. But, if you do remember that game, United were still fairly in that. It was 3-1 up until late on. United were chasing and a way back into it. Whereas this game, it was over, wasn't it? Really, like by half time. Was it 3 or 4-0 at half time?
It was 4.
4-0. That
It,
4-0 at half time.
It's the first time actually that United have been 4 down in a half time in the Premier League era.
Well, there you go. I mean, that says it all. And that City game I was referencing, that was 3-1 with about 10 minutes to go, and then City just kind of bombarded late on and made the scoreline what ended up being really embarrassing. But this 4-0 at half time, never a contest at any point. Maybe the first 4 minutes where Fernandes has that chance at 0-0. You can argue there was a competitive edge to it, but the minute the first goal goes in, it's just curtains.
Yeah, it was absolutely ridiculous as a match. Like, from a Liverpool perspective, it couldn't have been any more perfect. Like, honestly, in terms of the whole makeup of the game, like if you look at how the game worked out, Liverpool score 4 in the first half, win 5-0, spend the last half an hour just keeping the ball. Half of United's team got a booking. One of them even got sent off. Their star player scored a goal and got disallowed. It was just a really horrendous day for Manchester United. And again, from a Liverpool perspective, it couldn't have been more perfect, and it was ruthless. And I actually think that, it sounds mad saying this, I actually think Liverpool could have played a lot better, specifically on the ball.
Yeah, sorry, I was just agreeing with you. Yeah, and I thought they didn't look at the sharpest. Sorry, that they've looked across this season so far. There was a little spell, maybe last 20 minutes of the first half where a bit like a self-sabotage, kept giving the ball away in really kind of dangerous areas, inside their own half. Maybe a team with more confidence could have punished them. United couldn't, but I mean, we are nitpicking a little bit, aren't we? I guess that was the only negative, and it's not even a negative. But yeah, that was it, 5-0, and I think it was more of a brilliant result than performance, which is really kind of rubs the salt in the wound from a Manchester United point of view.
I mean, there was a fair few records that were broken on the day. Yeah, Liverpool, the first club to score 2 hat-tricks in the Premier League against Manchester United. The other one was Dirk Kuyt. Salah, I think, surpassed Didier Drogba on the day as the top scoring African player in the Premier League. Yeah, this was Liverpool's biggest away victory at Old Trafford ever. As I said, first time Manchester United have ever won in a half time, 4 goals down. There's a load of them basically. I think, funny enough, as well, another mad one. Jordan Henderson became the the Premier League player with the most passes ever during the game. I think the previous most was Gareth Barry, and Henderson's overtook him with something like I don't know what the figure is. It was a big figure, put it that way. Like, I'm
Missed
talking
that.
career figures.
Yeah, I missed that. I'll be honest. I hadn't seen that one.
Yeah,
Here's one for you though, Josh. Before we get into the numbers, was there a party you wanted the dust settled maybe that night that you were a little bit disappointed that they couldn't go and reach like a 7 or 8 nil scoreline? Because I think at one stage that could have happened, or were you not that bothered?
that wasn't even a dust settling thing. That was mid game. I During the game, I was like, keep going. You know what I mean? That typical fan perspective, I suppose. But at the same time, I think there's a big focus specifically from Klopp on don't get anyone injured. So I think from the perspective of controlling the game, you get out there with no more injuries, specifically to midfielders. Navigated already gone off on a stretcher. But yeah, so I think you could have went down genuinely historic routes and start putting 7 past them and things like that. And I am a bit disappointed still that they didn't. But then, you know, 5-0 before the game, you would have taken that every day of the week.
Say that
Um,
again, yeah.
I've just seen that Henderson figure actually. So he overtook Gareth Barry to become the leading passer in Premier League history. Total of 170,002 passes.
Oh,
Um,
apologies. So this wasn't in the 90-minute match. This was
no,
just
no, no.
historically. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, this is like one player ever based on his total figure.
Mm,
But anyway, I mean, we'll go step by step then in terms of the match. So there was a few changes made going into the game.
mm.
Some surprisingly from a Liverpool perspective, maybe. So Ibrahima Kanate coming for Joel Matip. Diogo Jota coming for Sadio Mane. And I think the midfield maybe was a bit of a surprise in terms of Milner, Henderson, and Keita. I suppose Keita had came off midweek against Atletico Madrid, but that was the team anyway. Were you surprised, Dave? What were your thoughts on the team?
I was a little bit surprised initially. I suppose Kanata, you putting them in could be seen as a little bit of a risk in such a big game. Obviously, those kind of fears seem a little bit daft, afterwards when you see how competent he performed. But obviously, that's with the benefit of hindsight. Mane was a big one. Obviously, big game player. He's been really sharp this season. Obviously, Jota's been on fire as well, of course, pretty much since he's come in. But you look at Mane and you kind of think of having that traditional Liverpool three in these big games of Mane, Firmino and Salah. But, Klopp does have previous, doesn't he, of kind of changing the team for the big games, for the big emotional games, ones that you think you normally wouldn't risk it. I think he's done it quite a few times in Merseyside derbies, 1 or 2 times against United. And most of the time, it hasn't really backfired. And you'd say it wouldn't here. But I would caveat it and say, if you look at that starting 11 that still played beyond maybe, I don't know, Milner. In fact, I can't think of another one. And even that's a bit harsh on Milner. I think beyond him, it's still a really good 11, isn't it? It's a really strong 11. So,
Yeah, I mean, looking at the side, I did think there was an element of risk attached to it. Obviously, it's a massive game to throw Kanate into. And I thought it was interesting that from a Mane perspective, that's the second consecutive game now at Old Trafford that Mane started on the bench, which I thought was quite interesting. So I had a little think about it. I got asked to write on the back of it, a bit of a review of the game and things from the Echo. And I think from a tactical perspective, it did make sense. So in terms of Kanate, he is physically very, very good. He's a lot quicker than Matip. And probably, I think you can say better 1v1. And I think if you look at United's threat, a lot of their threat comes on that side of the pitch. Pogba drifts over there, Ronaldo drifts over there, Rashford's already over there, Luke Shaw's more dangerous than Wan-Bissaka. So I think and Trent obviously it gets forward and has suffered at times at Old Trafford in the past. So I think to play Kanate, who can kind of, I suppose, cope a bit better than Matip can in isolation and can deal with Rashford 1v1 maybe, and can manage balls in behind and things like that, can use United's speed against them and things. I think it made sense ultimately to deploy Kanate, and I think during the game I thought he was absolutely spot on. I thought he was brilliant. And there's obviously that moment, Dave, we have to mention it. Have you seen it on social media where he's kind of there's a bit of a Barney basically, and he's just he's just moving Fred with his hands, and he's laughing as he's doing it because he's like,
that's the problem with these physical matchups. That fair play for Fred for trying to throw himself about, but yeah, he come off looking a bit silly there. Sorry to say.
I think, you know what though? I think when you think of Premier League history, this is a little bit cliche, maybe a little bit yada, but I think when it comes to Premier League history, the best sides, the absolute dominant sides, have always been really physical, haven't they? When you think of like, the Arsenal team with Sol Campbell, Patrick Vieira, and players like that. You think of Chelsea under Mourinho with Drogba and John Terry, and even the later Mourinho sides with Matic and players like that. Obviously, Manchester United had a fair few with Vidic, Ferdinand, Roy Keane, Liverpool with Van Dijk, Fabinho, and I think Kanate, he certainly looks like one of them units who can put himself about basically and be a real spine for Liverpool to build upon.
Yeah, it's about balance, isn't it? Because even City, who have won a lot of titles recently, a host of really good technical players. Maybe not a ton of height, in the attacking areas, but you think at the back, Company, Stones, these much taller physical players, and I think that it's a requirement to kind of have those profiles in the team, and Liverpool have definitely got them.
Yeah, and in terms of Jota, a little bit more of a surprise and inclusion maybe, but when I looked at that after the match, one thing I did identify as a bit of a difference between the two players was their pressing basically. Now I think when you watch Manchester United, I think they encounter issues when they build from the back. I don't think they're the best when they're building from the goalkeeper. I think they're fairly easy to press into a mistake. And if you look at Jota's numbers this season, so far this is Liverpool players only. Pressures in the final third, so defensive pressures in the final third. Salah's top on 71. Understandably, he's played every minute so far. Then Jota on 59 pressures, and then Mane on 37 pressures. So there's 22 pressures difference there between Jota and Mane, even though Mane has played about 150 minutes more than Jota. And obviously Jota's been described in the past as a pressing monster, I think, by Pep Linders. So I think just looking at that, maybe Jota was deemed as, even though Mane is really good defensively, maybe Jota was deemed as a bit more of a suitable player to deploy against a team that can't build from the back, and against a team that maybe you need to take your chances against. And I think Jota's very goals driven, isn't he? Whereas Mane, particularly in the last 12 months, has been a little bit hesitant when it comes to putting the ball in the net. So those are guesses really. But other than that, I'm not really sure exactly why you'd select Jota over Mane when Mane's been playing fairly normally lately. But I do think that Jota's got certain perks over Mane, and I think at the minute pressing seems to be one of them.
Yeah, I mean, educated guessing rather than guessing. Trying to put some logic behind it. Yeah, look, that could be the case. And we touched on Jota's pressing, Kanate's pace, and I thought he adjusted really well to the defensive line. I thought Liverpool were really good. Talked about it before, but United calls offside 7 times in the game, and you think, well, what's the causes for that? Pressing up the pitch, having to go long because you can't play out. When they're doing that, Liverpool's line is fantastic. You can't beat it, which is causing attackers to go a little bit too soon. What's the result? Get flagged for offside 7 times is a lot. And I spoke to you about it, and I think I tweeted about a couple of years ago when the High Line debate was going on about offsides, and nobody seems to do better than Liverpool when it comes to catching teams offside. 40 so far this season. That's the best in the Premier League. Second is Leicester on 27, so it's 13 more than any other side after just 9 games. And if you think about how Liverpool tend to dominate more of the ball, that's a high proportion of opposition attacks that are getting flagged for offside. It's something that they've been doing really well this year, and just it ties in basically with the point you were talking about. Maybe Jota had more of that the pressing on a side who can't play out too well, and then when they're forced to go to plan B, which is to go long, try and get the players in behind with the pace, they're struggling to do that as well, and all of it ended up nullifying United.
So in terms of Solskjaer's approach then, were you surprised? Because I thought personally there was an element of, it was a bit suicidal, I thought, what he's trying to do. I was really surprised that he opted to press Liverpool highly, despite the personnel that he had at his disposal, and despite the person that he was against in terms of Liverpool and the tools that Klopp has to play through such a press. I was really surprised by the approach, and I think it was quite. It was a major factor on why Liverpool scored 4 in the first half.
Yeah, but I think what's been happening at United, because we obviously write about them a lot. I think what I've noticed is this has been a kind of problem for them for the last few weeks. I think they're obviously trying to implement a game that's around basically mirroring what a top side would do. So, that's kind of pressing high intensity, dominating the ball, playing high up the pitch, like Liverpool's and City's. But the problem is they're just not as coherent with it. We assume that would be a coaching issue, but that's a very simplistic view of it. And there's a lot to it, I'm sure. But say if you blame that, you think of the chances they were conceding against Villarreal in the Champions League a couple of weeks ago. Kept getting done in transitions on the counter. Everton scored there a couple of weeks ago, counter again, kind of in a transition, and it happens. It was happening a lot against Atalanta in the game before the Liverpool game. Similar issues where conceding a lot of chances. De Gea's made some good saves. And then the problem is, you go and do that again. It's a Liverpool who've got kind of, the elite in fast breaks anyway. They're so quick, so efficient. And obviously, if you put them one-on-one, it's very unlikely that the keeper can do much about it. So it's hardly really surprised that they got punished so poorly, and you probably could have preempted it if you would have known that's how they were going to approach the game.
Well, Solskjaer did say before the game when they asked him about, what's the key today type thing, and he came up with a bit of a typical answer where he goes with loads of keys, and then I think it was Jeff Shreves asked, well, what's the top thing then, and Solskjaer said, be on the front foot and stamp your authority on the game. And he said after the game as well, when he was questioned about why did you press so high, he again said, when United are playing at home, it's what we should do. Now, that might be true, but if that isn't your way and you don't train that day in, day out, and you don't have like a cohesive, aligned way, this is how we do it. This is who you pick up. This is, whether it's zonal, whether it's man orientated. It just seemed to be a bit. This is quite a big criticism, really, but it felt a bit Sunday League. I thought, where it was kind of like where a coach would say, "Go and press," but without any consideration as to how to press. Now, obviously, everyone knows to an extent how to press. It's because to an extent, again, it's just closing down an opposing player. But as I said, if you don't do it right, if you don't do it in a unified way, you can just get played through easily. And I think a lot of the time, Bruno Fernandes comes to mind, and Mason Greenwood comes to mind as players who would just go attacking Alisson or Van Dijk, and they just get passed around because there was no one going with them or they weren't pressing in a way that cut off a passing lane, or they weren't pressing according to a specific trigger. It just seemed to be off the cuff pressing, off the cuff closing
Yeah,
down when you're playing when you're trying to close down players like Van Dijk, Trent, Andy Robertson, good players.
yeah, almost pressing as individuals rather than in packs.
Yeah,
And I do have a belief that I don't believe it was just a case of this is what we're going to do against Liverpool. I do think he's probably trying to implement this, with United, but I just don't think it's. I'm conscious to say this because it just seems quite harsh, but it's all you can really gather from the outside looking in. It's just clearly not being coached very well, is it? It just goes back to that point that he's probably not the best coach, or he's a little bit out of his depth. And I think, again, this is a really good example of why.
yeah, it comes across as a little bit prehistoric, really, where you'd kind of look at the situation and dumb it down and say it's just it's a team game, and he comes out with a lot of quotes that suggest that we need leaders and all that sort of stuff. And I think there's an element of truth attached to some of the things he says, but then you do also have to have that really deep, really thorough process strategy behind the scenes where you train in a specific way and things like that. And they do seem really torn at the minute as to what they actually are. Manchester United, particularly on the defensive side of the game, because they're obviously trying to dominate, trying to press high, without the players to press high and without the structure to press high, it seems.
Yeah.
And I thought Liverpool exploited it really, really well. I thought, specifically, McTominay and Fred, I felt very sorry for, because they're operating as a midfield too. But the ground that they were expected to cover is what you'd need the midfield for to cover. And I think, there was a few moments where Naby Keita, for example, would, despite being a centre midfield, and Naby Keita would occupy a position that you'd see maybe a winger in. And the issue with that is if Keita's occupying a wide position, it's dragging Fred over, and then as a result, McTominay comes over. And then, because they're operating as a double pivot, you then have space on the other side of the midfield in like the half space areas to use. So it was really easy to exploit, and I think there was a specific graphic that I'll send you in a sec, Dave, that comes to mind where, if you're fielding a front four, in essence, of Mason Greenwood, Marcus Rashford, Cristiano Ronaldo, and Bruno Fernandes, they're all going to be ahead of the ball to an extent. And I think it does result in a bank of four in attack, and then a midfield two tasked with covering the whole of midfield.
Especially when there's such a vast space between the front end of the team and the back as well. If you're pushing so high, that's just it worsens the problem, doesn't it? Creates even more spaces. At least if the team are compact, a little bit more compact with men behind the ball, that restricts the gaps in between. But as we've just discovered, United were pressing; they weren't pressing with any sort of cohesion, doing it in ones and twos. So you're basically getting players eliminated out the game straight away, and then it's those two who are having to try and do the job of twice as many players really, and you get punished for it.
Yeah, I mean, I've just sent you the tweet now that I was thinking about. It's quite amazing because obviously Liverpool used a midfield three, and then in addition to that, you have Roberto Firmino, who's inclined to drop off from a striker's type position into midfield. So what you essentially had was a kind of midfield four of Liverpool, like a diamond shape, just playing around the midfield two of McTominay and Fred, and they just kind of had no chance really, and very, very easy to play for. Have you clicked that, Dave?
Yeah. I'm looking now. Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
it's just you can play that way against certain opponents maybe, but to play like that against Liverpool,
yeah. I know. Bad, super sad.
Yeah, so on the back of the performance, this is obviously a Liverpool podcast, but what do you think United should do there with Solskjaer? I mean, was it that bad?
Look, I don't. In isolation, it was. Yeah, it was that bad. But I also wouldn't make a decision purely on that. I'd make it on as a wider as a wider call. And look, I honestly think there's no way back for them. And I think United at the moment is just delaying the inevitable. I draw parallels between what's going on with Solskjaer and United and what was happening with Chelsea and Lampard last year.
Yeah, I do the same.
Yeah, it's so similar. And you look at is there a Tuchel level coach available? There's a few maybe you could make a case for, but you look at what Tuchel's done with that exact same squad compared to what Lampard was doing with it. It's it was chalk and cheese. Beyond going on to win the Champions League, just in terms of improving everything from output in both boxes, underlying numbers, everything massively improved. And I think for all the kind of criticism we give United, they've still got a decent squad on paper. Well, a very good squad actually. Yeah, you can find a couple of holes in it, but it's a really good squad, and I think a top level manager would get more out of them.
Yeah, I agree. I do also think it's difficult though, given the timing of it, because it's mid-season obviously, and I assume that whoever United would like to target could be occupied in the job. Obviously, Antonio Conte has been linked, but he systematically favours a back three wherever he goes. And I'm not sure United have a squad that is being constructed to suit any sort of back three, really. So it's going to be interesting to see what they do, really. But I mean, it was really, really bad. Just on the numbers on the day, we haven't actually touched on them yet. So Liverpool, I mean, 3.8 XG for Liverpool without a penalty. And Manchester United 1.6. And in terms of the shot count isn't actually that dramatic, really. Liverpool 19 shots, United 12. And the possession share, Liverpool 63%, United 37%. But the XG in particular, Dave, 3.8 largely in open play. And no penalties involved. That is a very, very high figure. That.
Yeah, it completely kind of justifies the scoreline, doesn't it? 5-0 scoreline. And I was
going to say that essentially means that on a normal day everything goes as normal. Any team with bang average finishing probably scores 4. That's a big statement at Old Trafford.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see if they've ever conceded an XG that high with no penalties previously. It'd probably take a little bit of time to go back and look, and maybe not something we can do right now, but it's got to be, certainly since the metrics have been publicly available, that's got to be one of the highest they've ever had, if not the highest.
Yeah, I'm just going to get up now last season, just for the sake of argument. So last season, they conceded bang on 3.8 in the defeat to Spurs. If you remember, they lost 6-1.
6-1, yeah.
At Old Trafford. But I'm pretty sure they went down to 10 men. They went down to 10 men on the 28th minute. And that included a Harry Kane penalty.
I was about to say, yeah.
So this is just next level, really, isn't it? It's just a little bit to touch on Liverpool's players then. Mo Salah, Dave. I mean, we seem to be doing this every week.
Every week, yeah.
But he went and scored 3. I mean, he went and scored a hat-trick at Old Trafford. I mean, you can't stop him at the minute. I think he also got an assist. And for the FPL listeners, I think Dave's had a tough week.
Can we not? To say tough week is an understatement. I fell from in roughly around game overall ranked top 200,000 to something like I think I'm in the 700 odd thousand now on the back of that. It was a 200% drop. So yeah, it was just, I was so upset on Sunday night because, people who aren't into FPL just be rolling their eyes a little bit, but we're obviously into it. I think a few of the listeners are. I was devastated because first time I went off Salah captain, went Vardy, and disaster. So yeah, I'm sulking, mate. It's still burning now, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, it was a top performance. It was a top. His finishing, I thought, was very, very good as well. Our host, our producers just letting us know a few stats here. So Salah became the first visiting player to score a hat-trick at Old Trafford in the Premier League era. 30 seasons and no visiting player has previously done it. Yeah, so quite a big statement there from Mo Salah. I did say a few weeks back it could be the best I've seen him play, and I think now that's looking even more justified, to be honest, because it's not just his goals, it's also his creation, his general contributions, his threat, his availability. He's played every minute so far. He's just absolutely on top of his game at the minute. Proper peak Salah. And I actually seen a piece during the week from a lad who I follow. And he made a point that I'm disappointed I hadn't actually thought of, to be honest. But he made a point that I don't think he was exaggerating either, because it's going to sound like he's exaggerating. But he said that current Mo Salah is the closest thing that the Premier League has seen to Lionel Messi in terms of just what he offers on the pitch, scoring, creating, left foot, generally being a super dangerous attacking player, possessing the ball, moving the ball into the penalty box, dribbling, just everything. He offers a total game at the minute, and it is a massive threat, Dave.
Yeah. I'm still not on board with that statement, I'll be honest.
Who else are you going with then?
I don't know. I need longer to think about it, but that just seemed, and I don't know. I think
No, I agree with that, I'm telling you.
I'm not on board with that one yet. But right now he's just. Well, I mean, we've said it like every single week this season. He's just been. I mean, you probably think it is the best form he's been in. Definitely, from my point of view, it is. And what's remarkable, you did briefly touch on it. He just feels like has he ever been injured? Has he ever been injured? Has he ever? I don't know if he's ever had an impact. I think he had an impact concussion, didn't he? And missed the Barcelona return leg. But has he ever broke down with a thigh strain or calf injury? Just. I mean, he's an absolute poster boy for just not drinking, perfect diet. Being the ultimate professional. And I think this kind of adds weight to living that lifestyle, and he just so impressive, that side of things, beyond obviously the great football and ability as well.
Yeah, just looking a little bit deeper into his numbers here, it is top stuff. I mean, these are totals, so when I'm saying this now, he's going to be benefiting a little bit from the fact that he's played every minute. But so far, in terms of expected assists, he's top of the league. In terms of key passes, a pass that leads directly to a shot, he's fifth in the Premier League. In terms of passes into the penalty box, he's third. Then you consider that he's also top scorer. I think pretty certain he's had the most shots in the league. So he's just a proper all-round threat at the minute. And Dave, I'm not sure if I've asked. In fact, yeah, I have. But we can speak a little bit again about it, because I've thought about it since. Just briefly, without starting the fire. His contract, right? I think it's very, very easy to just say, right, give him what he wants. And I think I've done it. We've done it on this pod, I think, the past few weeks, because it just does feel like such an obvious answer. And I'm not going to go hipster here to the extent that I start saying it's a bad idea and like that. Total nonsense. But the rumours are that he's asking for 400 grand a week, right? I'm led to believe that Liverpool's current highest earner is on 220. So I'm just looking at that and I'm thinking that's going to be tricky. If he's persistent with 400 grand a week, although he fully deserves it as a player, I totally put my hands up with that. He deserves 400 grand a week as a player, especially in comparison to what other players in the league are on. Jadon Sancho, I think, is on about 350. De Bruyne is on 400 region. So Salah is without doubt good enough to be on that. But when the rest of the squad are on around 200, 100, it's a bit tricky, isn't it? You're playing with fire there.
Yeah, I think
It's
we
a bit
said
delicate.
yeah because it can quite easily upset the dynamic, and while Salah is the best player in the squad right now, best player in the league, probably best player in the world right now. We get all that. It is still a team game at the end of the day, and Liverpool got to think a little bit beyond just keeping Mo Salah happy. It probably could, but then the thing is, Josh, given the form he's in now, could who's a good pick someone out of the squad? Who do you reckon Liverpool's top earners are? Just give me two names.
Van Dijk and Thiago.
Okay. Could those two players, even though Van Dijk's fantastic, could they knock on the door and say, "Whoa, you're giving him 400 grand a week? We want that as well." Given what Salah's doing right now, and if he continues to do that across the course of the campaign.
I agree. I totally agree. But what I think one issue you maybe have is, let's say you give Salah 400. That's double most of the squad. So even if someone's not performing to Salah's level, they don't even have to be able to be in a position to ask them for 300, for
Mm,
example, because that's not what Salah's on. But it's 100 grand increase, if you see
mm,
what I mean. And I
yeah.
think it can have a bit of an issue when it comes to signing players, because say for example when Thiago came to Liverpool as an elite player, Champions League winner, multiple Bundesliga winner, played for Barcelona and Bayern Munich. So straight away, Thiago arrives at Liverpool. Liverpool say, right, you can be our joint highest earner. Thiago go, okay, no problem. So Thiago gets 200 grand a week. If when we signed Thiago, Salah was on 400 grand a week. That is a bit of a delicate one, isn't it? Because Thiago then could realistically asked for 400 grand a week, considering the player that he is and what he's done in the
Mm,
game.
mm,
Or maybe again he asks for 300 grand a week, which would be 100 grand more than what Van Dijk's on,
mm,
but than what Alisson's on,
mm,
Fabinho. So yeah, I'm just trying to bring these things to the conversation really, because I think it's very very easy to say give him what he wants, and I agree with that. I do think he deserves what he's asking for, but I just think from a squad perspective, managing the squad and stuff, it is a delicate one that I think Liverpool understandably have to bring him down, I think, from that figure if possible, or get around it by incentivising it, maybe by keeping him closer to 250 grand and saying, if you score 20 Premier League goals in a season, you get a 30 grand boost or whatever it is. I'm not too sure. I don't work at a club, but I think you have to get around it somehow.
Who do you think wants the 400 grand a week? Do you think he wants it, or do you think advisors around him are saying this is what you should be on?
Um,
Yeah, I don't know. He just doesn't strike me as someone who'd be so insistent on them on getting
yeah,
the finances, getting that kind of sum.
probably
But then we don't
probably
know him
the latter one.
personally.
Yeah,
Yeah.
probably his agent. I would assume. I mean, we've seen his agents on Twitter and things, and I think he's generally quite outspoken. I think it's fair to
Mm,
say. I think he is a big believer in Salah as a player and as a person, and I think he is somewhat understandably just probably looked at the league, looked at the other top players in the league, the likes of De Bruyne, and deemed Salah to be as good, and he is as good.
yeah.
Liverpool don't have a leg to stand on in in that department. So
Mm,
it's going to be interesting to see what happens. Obviously, it makes absolute sense to keep probably the best player in the world at this moment at your club. But there's multiple things at play here, so it's going to be interesting to see how Liverpool navigate that one.
mm,
But we'll move on anyway. In fact, just before we move on for United, we have to give Firmino a shout, because I thought Firmino was brilliant. I think going into the season and first few games of the season, he was getting forgotten about a little bit, I thought. Obviously, Jota begins to start matches. Firmino begins to become the fourth choice, and he specifically against United, despite the fact that he weren't really too involved in scoring or assisting, I just thought he was brilliant. He's just a top player. Linking the midfield, being in the right place at the right time, movement, work rate, pressures, top player, Dave.
Yeah. Yeah, I think what was happening with Firmino was obviously he wasn't converting at the, I say he wasn't converting at a great rate. He never really has, but he wasn't specifically last season getting on the score sheet too much. You look at the arrival of Jota, who can kind of play that position, has some similar traits, scores goals, and I think people were starting to think, he's probably got a fair case to play ahead of him. But maybe that's gave a little bit more incentive for Firmino just to step it up a notch, because I think he's looked quite good across the campaign as a whole so far, but specifically on Sunday, doing what Firmino does best, that kind of game that he implements, link and play, his technical ability is just almost unrivaled at times, isn't it? At times, sorry. And yeah, he had a fantastic game and really was that kind of, to use that well-worn term again, he was that advanced pivot up in the attacking third.
Yeah, I think Klopp gave out a few quotes on him recently, actually, in one of his press conferences. He described him in a really interesting way, I thought. So he said he's a connector. The best offensive defender I have ever saw in my life. But I think those are just general little terms that you can apply to Firmino, and he is very, very unique, very different. And in those top games, I think when you're playing those top games, I think any coach in the world would take him. I think he's that type of player. He's a dream. He's a manager's dream. And I think when it comes to, this is based on nothing, but when it comes to just what he's like as a person, he comes across as a bit of a maverick type and stuff, and he comes across as the type to maybe feed off the crowd a little bit. I don't think it's that much of a surprise for me that he had a bit of a downtime during the empty stadiums era. And now that's kind of ended, we have seen a bit of an upturn in form, I think, as you said, the past few weeks, and hopefully it continues.
Do you think he'll? The beauty of a small sample size, he's currently outperforming his XG, and those regulars out there who listen to the show will know he notoriously doesn't do that. So it'll be interesting to see if over a longer sample of minutes he can sustain that.
Yeah, I mean it's overdue, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been a long time since that last happened. But we'll see if he continues to do it, if he starts at Brighton, Dave. Have you been surprised by their results? I think they are currently 5th in the table, I think I'm right in saying. Yeah. Have you been surprised by them, Dave? Or?
No, because, well, at the early in the season, no, because obviously, we spoke about Brighton previously, spoke about them on other shows. A lot of people spoke about them. They were doing a lot of things right last season, despite loitering the bottom half of the table, or in the bottom half, I should say. But that kind of good coaching and everything's come together a little bit for them this season, and obviously they've had some really good results. Tailed off a little bit over the last couple of weeks. Not know if you've noticed. I think they're actually winless in about 4 games. But if you drill down to those games, you'd add a derby against Crystal Palace. They're equivalent to Everton, Liverpool. So obviously it's always a little bit more difficult, isn't it? Those results can be a little bit harder to predict. Then they had a game against Arsenal at home. Did you catch that game, Josh?
I caught the second half of that game.
Yeah, it was a game where I happened to see it, and they battered them at least from a performance point of view. Unlucky not to win it. Drop points against Norwich was supposed someone was going to, and then City, isn't it? So one of them where the results look like they tailed off a little bit, but there's kind of caveats for each. So yeah, interesting.
Do you know what? I hadn't actually picked up on their results tailing off to that extent. I wasn't aware that they were winless in 4, and I suppose you could include 5 if you're including the Carabao Cup in that.
Yeah.
And I've just looked. Did you see their numbers against City?
No, I didn't look at the underlying numbers.
So we were speaking before about Liverpool and posting an XG of 3.8 at Old Trafford. City posted an XG of 3.9, which is incredibly high to face Brighton. That suggests Brighton's defence was an absolute mess. I saw the highlights, didn't see the actual match. City obviously scored 4. But that bodes well for Liverpool, I suppose.
Yeah, and you know, we made a big thing of no penalties in Liverpool's XG, and from what I can see, there wasn't one, was there, for City either. So
No, no.
yeah, we're very high. There was one penalty in the game, but ironically, it was for Brighton.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to Brighton, I think I'm not surprised by the results that they're picking up because it feels like we've kind of been flagging that should be the case for ages because they've been generally posting good underlying numbers, and usually when that's the case, the results will follow eventually. But I think when you look at their numbers this season, Dave, funny enough, despite the fact that they're picking up results, I think their underlying numbers are actually slightly worse than they were, which is funny. I mean, if you look at their numbers this season, they've posted better underlying numbers than their opponents in 4 games against Burnley, Arsenal, Leicester, and Watford. In the other games, the other 5 it will be now, they've posted either level or slightly worse. So it's quite funny trying to. I mean, Brighton are just a bit of an enigma, to be honest.
Yeah. It felt like for different reasons last year. It felt like they were doing so much right and not getting the results. But obviously this year it feels like it's gone the other way a little bit. But they're getting a few more results. Although this will be quite a test for them. Obviously Liverpool and Chelsea toughest teams in the Premier League at the moment to come up against, but obviously coming in on the back of a little bit of a dip in form as well. It'll be interesting to see if that's going to be something that's sustained or if they can bounce back from that.
Yeah, just looking at their numbers now so far for the season. So in attack, they're actually very, very quiet. So if you look at their expected goals, excluding penalties, they have the 19th in the table for that, ahead of only Norwich. So only Norwich have got a worse attack so far this season than Brighton. Obviously, it's very early days. Things can get shaped as we move on throughout the season. But I suppose it bodes well for Liverpool's ability to keep a clean sheet on the weekend. And on the defensive side of the game, Brighton are better, but I think they've been impacted quite a bit by that City XG performance. Obviously, City posted 3.9, so that's taken quite a bit off them. So, in terms of their defence, Brighton are looking slightly better than mid-table at the minute. But again, once you remove that mad City results, I'd say Brighton are probably, top 6 defence in the league. Brighton, I think.
Yeah, well, that has kind of been probably, the kind of basis for their success so far. I'm sure we'll come on to it. They've obviously they've got the back three. If you think about the central defenders, they have the likes of Dunk, Duffy. You got really kind of Veltman when he's playing, which sometimes every time he was in my FPL he wasn't. But they've got really kind of solid defenders who suit a system like that. Which, and if your defense is strong, it's kind of half the battle, isn't it? In terms of winning matches, and then it's just about if you can keep a clean sheet every week, you only need 1 goal, don't you? You don't need this scintillating forward line. Obviously, that's easier said than done, but it's a good basis to be a successful side.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, they're still operating with a back three against City. Their back three consisted of Joel Veltman, Lewis Dunk, and Dan Burn. I think Dan Burn is injured now, so maybe that will be Duffy. You have Mark Cucurella in there, who's been a decent sign so far, and Solly Marsh on the right side, right wing back. In midfield, funny enough, Adam Lallana has been getting a few games, and up front, it has been a duo of Neil Maupay and Leandro Trossard. So going into this game, what I'm kind of expecting, I think Liverpool will have a bit of a challenge on their hands in terms of breaking Brighton down and finding the net. And I think defensively, although Brighton are capable, I think Liverpool will generally be okay defensively. I'm expecting a clean sheet personally. But I think it will be interesting to see Liverpool's attack in this game because obviously we've said a few times so far this season Liverpool's attack is red hot at the minute, and they're coming up against a decent defence, but a decent defence that has just been hammered by City by the looks of it. So it's going to be interesting to see if anything gets changed on the back of the City game, if they learn from any of their mistakes, or if Liverpool look at the City game and use some of the tactics that Guardiola used to obviously gain inroads against them. But yeah, it's going to be an interesting one, Dave.
Yeah, if you think of the back three, the way Liverpool's system is, you naturally have a 3v3, don't you? You have three attackers on their back three with, where the front three is going to be. And then providing the width will be, you kind of want wing backs to do that. Liverpool have two of the best. So I actually, I think it could be a good result for Liverpool, this one, despite Brighton being a good side.
Yeah, so we'll do predictions then, I think. So where are you going to go with this one, Dave?
I am going to go Liverpool win. I'm going to go a 2-0 victory. Yeah, I just fancy Liverpool there. It's getting easier again, mate. It's like 2 years ago. It's easy, just back Liverpool to win, and we come out on top with predictions.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I went into the Old Trafford match giving Solskjaer more faith than I probably should have, thinking that he'll get the team up for the game. It's a bit of a derby, isn't it? Two rivals and stuff. So I went for a 1-1 actually, just thinking that it'd follow the pass, but obviously Liverpool exploited them majorly throughout the game and turned into a 5-0. But for this match, I think I'm going to go 2-0 like yourself. I'm going to go with you. I don't think Liverpool will hammer this team, but I suppose City have just kind of done it, so it's possible. And I think, as I said, in defence, I would expect Liverpool to keep a clean sheet. Be interesting to see if Konate starts again, actually, and if Konate's maybe just edged out Joel Matip as the starting player.
Yeah, it'll be interesting.
So yeah, we'll be back next week to look at Atletico Madrid, possibly. I mean, even though we've already just kind of done it, we'll be reviewing Brighton, and we'll be looking ahead. So yeah, thanks for tuning in, Dave. Thanks for joining us, mate.
Cheers, mate. Cheers, everyone.
And we will be back next week. Do tune in. Thanks. See you then.